imagine for a second discovering a society that possesses, the complete flawless blueprints for nuclear fusion
Right.
or quantum computing or even faster than light travel. I mean, they understand the mathematics perfectly.
They have all the raw materials.
Exactly. They have everything they need to build the reactors. But instead, they consciously choose to take those blueprints, put them in a locked museum, turn off the lights, and basically go back to planting wheat by hand.
Yeah, it's a wild thought experiment. Because today we aren't talking about primitive aliens. We are talking about, well, the terrifying power of restraint.
Yeah, and that friction between what we can build and what we should build, that is the absolute heart of what we're unpacking today.
It completely shatters our modern assumption.
Right. So, welcome. We are broadcasting to you tonight from the little station on Commercial Street, right here in Atchison, Kansas. This is Chesterton Radio, and you've joined us for another edition of Under the Hood.
Always great to be here.
And, if you just look out your window right now, maybe you see the evenings settling over your own town. The crickets are starting up. The street lamps are flickering on.
It's a good time to just pause.
Exactly. Whether you're sitting out on a porch, standing in a workshop, or maybe you're driving down a really long, dark stretch of interstate highway tonight, we want to invite you to just step away from the rush of the machine age for a little while.
Pull up a chair.
Yeah. Because we are diving deep into a forgotten 1970 BBC Saturday Night Theater production. It's called The Burning of the Grass, written by John Wilkie.
Such an incredible piece of audio drama.
It really is. And we're going to examine the Cold War anxieties that fueled this whole era of British sci-fi. We'll dissect the bureaucracy of first contact, debate the theology of environmental stewardship, and, analyze the psychological mechanics of nonviolent resistance.
Which is a lot to cover, but
we're going to get there. So, okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with the historical context, right? Because 1970 was...
Well, it's the only way to truly decode what Wilkie is attempting here. You really have to look at the psychological environment of that specific era.
Right, the late 60s, early 70s.
Exactly. The globe was entirely dominated by the doctrine of mutually assured destruction.
Maddie,
yeah. We refer to it so casually today, but I think we often forget the intense, just inescapable game theory that underpinned the whole thing.
It was constant.
It was. You had the brightest mathematicians and political scientists in the world, people at the Rand Corporation, thinkers like John von Neumann. And they were running these hyper-rational, constant calculations on global suicide.
Yeah, and we often mischaracterize the Cold War as this time of irrational panic, like people just running around screaming.
Buck and cover drills, that kind of thing.
Right, but when you actually read the declassified documents from those defense think tanks, the most disturbing element isn't panic at all. It's the chilling mathematical rationality of it.
Yes. The Nash equilibrium applied to a thermonuclear holocaust.
It's terrifying.
And that hyper-rationality is exactly what you see captured in Sidney Lumet's film from 1964, Failsafe.
Ah, such a good movie.
Brilliant film. The narrative follows a mechanical error, basically, that accidentally sends American bombers to destroy Moscow.
And the politicians are scrambling to avoid the retaliatory strike that will end the entire world.
Exactly. But the true villain of that film isn't a Soviet premier, right? Or even a rogue general. It's Dr. Grotchikl.
The civilian strategist.
Right, a nuclear strategist.
Right.
There's this crucial scene at a dinner party where Grotchikl argues that a nuclear war would just be, another war.
Right, just a bigger one.
Yeah. He coldly calculates that if the U.S. loses 60 million people, but the Soviets lose 100 million, then that constitutes a victory.
Because the capitalist system survived.
Exactly. And the communist ideology is eradicated. It's pure cold math.
But wait, let me push back on that for a second, because isn't it slightly unfair to judge those Cold War planners so harshly, like the real-life inspirations for Grotchikl? Well, they were dealing with a binary reality, right? Deter or die. So Grotchikl sounds completely sociopathic when he talks about 60 million deaths as a cost of doing business.
Right, yeah.
But in the context of deterring a global totalitarian empire, wasn't that brutal calculus kind of the only tool they had to prevent the war from actually happening?
I mean, the dilemma you're pointing to is very real. But the critique embedded in Failsafe and in the Wilkie play we're discussing today, it's about what happens to the human soul when it adopts that calculus permanently.
Ah, okay. The long-term effect.
Right. Grotchikl represents the ultimate detachment of the intellect from morality. When you reduce human lives to data points in a zero-sum game, you literally stop seeing human beings altogether.
You just see variables.
Exactly. You only see variables. And this kind of bureaucratic detachment, it's also the central terror in Neville Shute's 1957 novel, On the Beach.
Oh, wow, yeah. That is a phenomenal connection. On the Beach is, it is perhaps the most depressing book of the 20th century.
It really is.
Because it just strips away all the action movie tropes of the apocalypse. There are no laser battles, no mutant warlords. The war has already happened in the Northern Hemisphere.
Everyone up there is just dead.
Dead. And the story takes place in Australia, where the survivors are literally just waiting for the lethal radioactive clouds to drift down across the equator.
Right. There's no fighting it.
There's just government-issued suicide medication.
It's so bleak. And look at the character of Commander Dwight Towers in that novel.
The submarine captain.
Yeah. He commands an American submarine stranded in Melbourne. His family in America is dead. His country is gone. The entire human race has weeks left to live.
And what does he do?
He continues to fill out naval paperwork. He buys presents for his deceased children.
Oh, that part is so heartbreaking.
It's brutal. He ultimately chooses to sink his submarine in international waters because the naval regulations dictate that an unmanned vessel cannot be left in a foreign port.
Wow.
He clings to the bureaucracy because the structure of the manual is the only bulwark he has left against the existential void.
The manual literally replaces reality for him.
Entirely.
Because if he starts following the procedure, he has to acknowledge that everything he dedicated his life to was actually a machine designed for suicide.
Exactly. And that tradition of philosophical, deeply moral sci-fi feels very uniquely British for this era.
Yeah, because American pulp magazines were often focused on, space marines fighting bug-eyed monsters.
Right, action and lasers.
But the BBC was broadcasting these quiet stories that question the very nature of human progress.
You see that tradition really anchored by writers like Arthur C. Clarke and John Wyndham. Wyndham is particularly relevant to this mindset, I think.
Oh, definitely.
Because before World War II, he lived at the Penn Club in London, which was an establishment deeply tied to the Quaker movement. It was filled with pacifists.
Right.
But then, during the war, he served as a cipher operator in the Royal Corps of Signals. He literally landed in Normandy shortly after D-Day.
So he saw it firsthand.
He witnessed the absolute apex of mechanized slaughter. So when you look at his later masterpieces, like The Chrysalids or The Day of the Triffids, you are reading the work of a man who watched human engineering tear the world apart.
He's profoundly skeptical of any society that equates technological advancement with moral superiority.
Exactly.
But let me push back on that framing of classic sci-fi for a moment. Because today, the metric we use to judge old science fiction is usually prediction, right?
Sure, yeah.
We laud a 1950s author if they accurately predicted the iPad, or orbital satellites, or AI.
Right, like they had a crystal ball.
Yeah, but looking at Wyndham, Shute, and Wilkie, it seems like treating sci-fi as a crystal ball fundamentally misunderstands the genre. I mean, if these authors were just trying to predict the future, they failed miserably. We didn't blow up the world in 1970.
Well, evaluating classic science fiction based on its predictive accuracy is like evaluating a painting based on how closely it resembles a photograph.
Ah, I like that.
It just misses the point of the art form entirely. These writers were not attempting to draft a roadmap of the 22nd century. They were constructing a mirror.
Right, angling it to reflect the moral anxieties of their own present moment.
Exactly. John Wilkie isn't trying to tell us what faster-than-light travel will actually look like. If you connect this to the bigger picture, he is taking the hyper-bureaucratic, technologically obsessed mindset of 1970s Earth, locking it in a tin can, and crashing it into a society that has entirely rejected that paradigm.
Which brings us directly to the plot of our deep dive today. We are on the bridge of the Earth survey ship, the Achilles. We are in polar orbit around Centauri IV.
Setting the scene?
Yeah. Commander Jonathan Breen is looking down at the planet surrounded by his crew. You have Duran, the Franco-African scientist, Myers, the psychologist, and crewmen Pirelli and Barishoff.
The representatives of the United Commonwealth of Earth.
Right. And they are executing a standard first contact mission.
Though the parameters of that mission are essentially colonial mercantilism disguised as philanthropy.
Oh, 100%.
The Earth Manual dictates a two-tiered approach to the galaxy. If they encounter a society as advanced as Earth, they establish diplomatic trade.
Fair enough.
But if they encounter a so-called primitive society, They implement what they call an uplift program. They introduce industrial technology, factories, advanced agriculture.
And what's the catch?
In exchange, Earth claims the exclusive rights to strip mine the planet's raw materials to feed its own insatiable industrial machine.
Right, it's the standard imperial bargain.
Yeah.
We give you internal combustion engines, you give us your mountains.
Exactly.
But when the crew looks at the viewplates from orbit, the data completely short-circuits their expectations.
It doesn't make sense to them.
No, because they see these sprawling, highly advanced cities, metropolises the size of London, constructed with sophisticated alloys and engineering, but they are entirely empty.
The cities are dead.
Yes. Meanwhile, the only thermal signatures of human life are coming from a single, lush, green valley where roughly 80,000 people are living this quiet, agrarian, pre-industrial life.
And the crew's immediate reaction to that visual is incredibly telling. Crewman Bereshoff instantly assumes they are looking at a caste system.
Right. He jumps straight to oppression.
He posits that a technologically advanced ruling elite must be maintaining the cities somewhere, using religious superstition to keep a subjugated peasant class toiling in the dirt valleys.
Their minds immediately map a power hierarchy onto the landscape.
Because they literally cannot conceive of a paradigm where a society possesses the capacity to build a metropolis and then voluntarily chooses to walk out of it.
It just does not compute. And the visual of the actual landing is brilliant. The Achilles touches down and out steps Commander Breen and his crew.
In their uniforms.
Yes, matching, rigid uniforms. They are literally encased in a metal egg that represents the pinnacle of their science, and they walk out to meet the locals, who are Barrick, an elder, Shervian, a young widow, and her son, Jody.
And the Centaurians don't cower in fear of the spaceship.
Not at all. They don't fall to their knees in religious awe. They just stand there, evenly spaced, completely calm, and entirely unimpressed by the machinery.
And this encounter immediately exposes Breen's psychological Achilles heel, if you pardon the pun.
Oh, nice one.
Breen operates his entire life through the manual. So he approaches Barrick and begins demanding to speak to the Planetary Council, or a national government, or even a tribal dictator.
He needs somebody in charge.
Breen requires his centralized political authority to sign the treaties mandated by his regulations. So when Barrick calmly explains that they do not have a government, that they don't have leaders or a formalized power structure at all, Breen's cognitive framework basically begins to fracture.
We see this exact tension in Ursula K. Le Guin's Hainish cycle, particularly The Dispossessed, which was published just a few years after this play, right?
The Dispossessed provides the perfect vocabulary for what is happening on Centauri the Other.
Yeah, lay that out for us.
Well, in Le Guin's novel, you have the twin planets of Uruz and Anaris. Uruz is a world of nation-states, extreme wealth disparity, and rigid vertical hierarchies.
Like Earth.
Right. Anaris, however, is a harsh moon colonized by Odonian anarchists who built a society based entirely on mutual aid, voluntary syndicates, and custom, rather than law and coercion.
So nobody is actually forcing anybody to do anything.
Exactly. And when the physicist Shevek travels from Anaris to the capitalist Uruz, the people of Uruz cannot fathom how Anaris functions. They keep asking, who gives the orders? How do people know where to work if no one forces them?
The mechanics of anarcho-syndicalism are just invisible to a mind trained in imperialism.
Completely invisible.
So what does this all mean for Breen? He is looking at a society that operates on mutual consensus, and because it lacks coercion, he just categorizes it as primitive.
Precisely. Breen relies on his manual the way modern artificial intelligence relies on its training data.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Think about it. If you feed an AI a prompt that falls completely outside the parameters of its training data, it doesn't experience a moment of profound philosophical realization.
No, it hallucinates.
It hallucinates.
Yeah.
It fabricates a false reality that allows it to generate an output consistent with its internal logic. Breen's manual contains procedures for dealing with hostile empires and procedures for exploiting primitive tribes.
But nothing for peaceful anarchists.
Zero data on how to interact with a highly advanced society of peaceful anarchists. So Breen begins to hallucinate a reality where the Centaurians are just helpless children in need of Earth's paternalistic intervention.
Okay, but to play devil's advocate here for a second, isn't a manual fundamentally just a repository of past wisdom?
In theory, yes.
I mean, if you are a starship commander making first contact with an unknown alien species, you need rigid procedures. You can't just operate on vibes.
Right, the stakes are too high.
Exactly. A single misstep could introduce a pathogen, or trigger a war, or violate some unseen cultural taboo. So why do we condemn Breen for relying on the accumulated procedural safety measures of his civilization?
That is a very fair defense of the concept of procedure. But Breen's failure is that the procedure has entirely replaced his capacity for observation.
Ah.
A manual is supposed to be a tool for navigating reality, but for Breen, the manual is reality. When the facts on the ground contradict the manual, Breen just assumes the facts are wrong.
He assumes they're just ignorant farmers.
Yes, and he presses forward with his mandate to offer them nuclear power and space flight in exchange for mining rights.
Which brings us to the real hinge point of the narrative. Breen sits down with Barrick and formally offers him the absolute pinnacle of human achievement, the atom and the stars.
And Barrick, with complete serenity, declines.
He just says no. He refuses the technology. Breen is genuinely offended by this. He demands to know why these ignorant farmers would reject the keys to the universe.
And that's when Barrick finally explains how they measure time.
Right. He tells Breen that they are currently in spring year 93. Breen is confused. Why only year 93?
Because 93 years ago, Centauri IV experienced total nuclear apocalypse.
Pam.
Barrick explains that less than a century ago, they had nation-states, massive populations, and, in his words, clever, shiny technologies.
And they used those technologies to wage a war of complete annihilation.
The massive cities aren't empty because the Centaurians forgot how to maintain them. They are empty because the inhabitants were vaporized.
The 80,000 people standing in front of Breen are the descendants of the few who managed to survive in a single unpoisoned valley.
They aren't a primitive culture yet to discover the machine. They are a post-apocalyptic culture that survived it.
And the most shocking mechanical detail of this revelation is that they didn't actually lose their scientific knowledge.
No, they didn't.
During a reconnaissance sweep, the Earth crew enters one of the abandoned cities and realizes that this massive building they're looking at isn't a factory, it's a museum.
The Centaurians deliberately dismantled their nuclear reactors, their energy weapons, and their advanced manufacturing tools, and they literally locked them behind glass.
They preserved the knowledge while rejecting its application. It is this conscious communal vow of technological poverty.
And this stands in stark contrast to the most famous post-apocalyptic novel of the era, Walter M. Miller Jr.'s A Canticle for Leibowitz.
Oh, absolutely. If you want to understand the mechanics of societal collapse, Canticle is the textbook.
Right. In Miller's timeline, a 20th century nuclear war, the Flame Deluge, is followed immediately by a violent grassroots movement called the Simplification.
The survivors realize that the politicians and the scientists built the bombs, so the survivors form lynch mobs.
They hunt down anyone who can read. They burn the libraries. They actively destroy the intellectual foundations of the world in this fit of traumatized rage.
And the knowledge only survives because a fringe order of Catholic monks hides out in the desert, burying blueprints and physics textbooks in casks, copying them for centuries without even understanding the math.
Miller's novel operates on a profoundly pessimistic, cyclical view of human nature. The monks preserve the knowledge, and eventually, humanity rebuilds.
They reinvent the printing press.
Then the electric light, then the starship, and inevitably, tragically, they reinvent the nuclear bomb and destroy the world a second time.
Because Miller's thesis is that the human intellect will always outpace human morality. We are inherently incapable of possessing the fire of the gods without burning down our own house.
Exactly.
But I need to interject and push back on the Centaurians' morality here.
Go for it.
Because I think we are romanticizing their choice to lock away the technology. Let's look at the actual mechanical reality of what they did. They didn't just lock away the nuclear warheads.
No, we locked away everything.
They locked away the antibiotics, they locked away the MRI machines, the advanced agricultural equipment that prevents famine, the water purification systems.
It was a total rejection.
Right. So is it actually moral to let a child die of a completely curable infection like appendicitis just because the society is terrified of rebuilding a power grid? That doesn't sound like enlightenment to me. That sounds like a traumatic overreaction that sacrifices the weak on the altar of a philosophical absolute.
What's fascinating here is that is the exact argument Durand, the earth scientist, wrestles with in the play.
Right. He sees the suffering.
He does. But the Centaurian counterargument relies on understanding technology not as a menu of isolated tools, but as an integrated, holistic paradigm.
Okay, unpack that a bit.
Well, you cannot have the MRI machine without the vast industrial base required to manufacture superconductors. You cannot have the industrial base without massive energy grids, resource extraction, and a complex hierarchical labor force to maintain it.
So you can't just pick and choose.
Exactly. And the Centaurians believe, based on their own history, that this specific hierarchical extractive paradigm inevitably, mathematically, leads back to the bomb. They view the death of a child from appendicitis as a horrific individual tragedy. But they view the resurrection of the industrial machine as a guaranteed species-level extinction event.
So they have chosen the ongoing daily grief of natural limits over the apocalyptic arrogance of total control.
Yes.
And that distinction between natural limits and apocalyptic control is perfectly captured in the title of the play itself, The Burning of the Grass.
It's a profound metaphor.
It really is.
Yeah.
And this dynamic is explored through Ngomo Durand, the Franco-African scientist on Breen's crew. Durand is fascinating because he is a brilliant technician, but he clearly chafes under the suffocating bureaucracy of Earth.
He mentions early on that whenever he returns home, he retreats to a small, primitive farm in Africa just to feel the soil under his boots.
Durand is the bridge between the two worldviews. He takes a walk outside the settlement with Shurin, the young Centaurian widow, and he is trying to warn her about what Earth's progress actually looks like.
He describes how, on Earth, the natural biosphere has been almost entirely paved over. But grass is resilient. Right, it constantly pushes its way up through the cracks in the concrete.
And the Earth government views this not as nature recovering, but as a structural defect that must be eradicated.
Right.
Durand describes the mechanism they use to handle it. He tells Shurin that the scientists engineered a machine that spews a searing white chemical fire.
It is designed specifically to incinerate biological life while leaving the synthetic concrete completely unharmed.
He recounts standing in a field, watching this machine spray white fire over the landscape, reducing living soil to gray, sterile dust where nothing will ever take root again.
It is the defining metaphor of the deep dive. Earth expends its greatest scientific genius to invent a fire that burns the living grass to protect dead concrete.
While Centauri V chose to abandon their dead concrete cities, specifically to allow the living grass to return.
And when Durand describes that white fire raining down on the fields, it immediately evokes the environmental horror documented in Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, which was published in 1962.
Oh, absolutely. Carson's work is essential context here.
Because she wasn't just writing about the chemical properties of DDT, she was writing about the catastrophic hubris of the post-war mindset.
Specifically, consider her documentation of the USDA's fire ant campaign in the late 1950s.
Right. The government categorized the imported fire ant as a devastating threat to southern agriculture. But their solution wasn't targeted management.
It was an indiscriminate carpet bombing campaign using highly toxic chlorinated hydrocarbons like dieldrin and heptachlor.
They literally crop dusted millions of acres with neurotoxins.
And the mechanical failure of that campaign was spectacular. Through the process of biological magnification, the toxins moved up the food chain.
It didn't just kill the ants.
No, it exterminated the songbirds. It poisoned the groundwater, killed the livestock, and decimated family pets.
Carson used this incident to illustrate the sheer arrogance of the chemical age, this belief that humanity had the right and the competence to violently reshape the biological architecture of the planet through brute force.
And that arrogance, the belief that we are the undisputed masters of the material universe, entitled to extract and destroy at will, that is exactly what Catholic social teaching identifies as the root of our ecological and spiritual crisis.
Yes, if you read Pope Francis's 2015 encyclical, Laudato Si', it reads almost like a direct commentary on the ideology of the Achilles.
Laudato Si' provides a profound theological lens for this conflict.
It really does. The encyclical argues that the ecological crisis is not merely a technical problem, it is a symptom of a deeper spiritual rupture. Francis writes that we have come to see ourselves as the lords and masters of the earth, entitled to plunder her at will.
Which is the exact mandate of Earth's colonial expansion.
Myers, the ship's psychologist, gets drunk later in the play and explicitly describes Centauri I as a giant, fertile ovary, just waiting to be forcefully impregnated by Earth's heavy industry and stripped of its wealth.
Ugh. Such a gross, visceral image. But the encyclical goes deeper by tracing this back to the story of Cain and Abel.
Right.
Francis points out that when Cain murders his brother, the blood cries out not from the sky, but from the soil. The violent rupture of human brotherhood fundamentally destroys the relationship between humanity and the earth itself.
The text explicitly links human violence with ecological devastation.
And that is the exact historical trauma of Centauri I. Their Cain and Abel moment was global thermonuclear war.
They committed the ultimate mechanized violence against their brothers, and in doing so, they rendered their soil radioactive.
So the reason they now live with such profound gentleness on the land isn't because they are naive tree huggers. They are living a life of penitential ecology.
They know the exact price of that rupture, and they are doing penance by refusing to rearm the machine.
Let's just pause for a moment and consider the implications of that for our own lives. We live in a society that fetishizes disruption,
We view every technological limit as an insult to human potential.
Exactly. But is there a dignity to ordinary life, to a Chestertonian gratitude for limits that we are actively destroying?
G.K. Chesterton often wrote about how true joy is found not in infinite expansion, but in the boundaries of a given thing.
And the Centaurians have found that joy, that gratitude for a simple piece of bread and a quiet evening, but they only found it by walking through the fire.
The tragedy of the play is that Earth's ideology of endless expansion simply cannot tolerate a society that has chosen limits. Violence is inevitable.
It is structurally inevitable. You cannot drop a heavily armed, imperialist, bureaucratic system into a society of vulnerable pacifists without a catalyst for conflict.
And in Wilkie's narrative, that catalyst is a young Centaurian boy named Ronnie.
Right. Now, Ronnie is a fascinating psychological study because he isn't a saint. He is a teenager growing up in a utopian society that has completely eradicated conflict, and as a result, he feels entirely unmoored.
He has no way to test himself, no way to prove his courage.
So during a tense meeting between Breen and the elders, Ronnie acts out. He steals a blaster, a lethal energy weapon from Breen's holster, and runs away.
The immediate reaction of the Earth crew reveals their own psychological conditioning perfectly. Breen instantly categorizes the theft as a strategic military action.
He assumes Ronnie is a terrorist.
Yeah, he assumes the boy is planning to reverse engineer the weapon or launch an asymmetric attack against the Achilles.
But Ronnie has no grand political motive. He just wanders off into the radioactive Badlands where mutated predators still survive, simply trying to prove his bravery to himself.
And mechanically, because he doesn't actually understand the brutal reality of the weapon he stole, he hesitates when a mutated beast attacks him.
And he's killed. Durand tracks the boy down, finds his body, and brings it back to the village.
Sure.
And Durand is terrified of what will happen next.
Because in Earth's paradigm, if a foreign military force brings a weapon into your town and it results in the death of a child, the result is riots, retribution, and blood feuds.
But the Centaurians' mechanical process for dealing with violence is completely alien to the Earthmen. We get a hint of this earlier in the play when Durand asks Shorin how their society handles violent crime.
Specifically murder. Shorin's explanation of their justice system is one of the most mechanically fascinating parts of the world building.
Yeah, walk us through that.
Well, she explains that decades ago, a man found an ancient weapon in one of the museum cities and used it in a fit of passion to kill a woman in the village.
If this happened on Earth, the state would execute a monopoly on violence. Police, courts, concrete prisons, or the electric chair.
But the Centaurians do not have a state to execute violence. Instead, they utilize radical, restorative social pressure.
Shorin explains that the entire village surrounded the murderer's house. But they didn't bring torches or pitchforks. They performed the ritual for the dead.
Usually this is a ceremony where families stand around a grave from sunset to sunrise, emitting a soft, collective sighing sound to mourn the passing of the soul.
But for the murderer, they didn't mourn the victim at his house, they mourned him.
The entire society stood outside his windows all night, mourning the death of his humanity.
We have to unpack why that actually works sociologically.
It works because Centauri I is a high-trust, deeply interdependent face-to-face society.
Right. In a massive, anonymous, industrialized city on Earth, a criminal can simply vanish into the crowd or find a subculture that glorifies his violence.
Social shaming doesn't work if the society is fragmented.
Exactly. But in a village of survivors, where your survival depends on mutual aid, being declared spiritually dead by every single person you know is a psychological punishment far more devastating than a concrete cell.
It forces the perpetrator to internalize the absolute moral horror of his own actions, reflected back at him by the community.
And this exact mechanism of nonviolent psychological pressure sets the stage for the climax of the narrative.
Because after Ronnie's death, Breen locks his crew inside the Achilles, anticipating a violent uprising.
As the sun sets, the crew watches the external monitors. They see movement in the hills. But it isn't just the local village. It is the entire surviving population of the planet.
80,000 Centaurians walk out of the valleys and form a massive, unbroken circle around the spaceship.
The tension in this scene is masterfully constructed. The Centaurians do not have weapons. They do not throw rocks at the hull. They do not shout demands or wave banners.
They simply stand shoulder to shoulder in the darkness, completely motionless and utterly silent.
And the psychological terror this inflicts on Breen is profound. It's important to understand why it terrifies him. Breen is a military commander. His entire cognitive architecture is built on the physics of force and counterforce.
If the Centaurians had attacked with laser rifles or even pitchforks, Breen's stress levels would have actually decreased.
Because a violent attack fits into a recognizable schematic. The manual tells him exactly how to calibrate the ship's shields and return fire.
You can view the silent demonstration as a psychological, distributed denial of service. A DDoS attack on Breen's brain.
Oh, that's brilliant.
The DDoS attack works by flooding a server with so many incomplete, anomalous requests that the server's logic loops endlessly trying to resolve them until the system crashes.
Right.
Breen's military mind requires resistance to function. By providing zero physical resistance but immense unified moral presence, the Centaurians trap Breen in an infinite cognitive loop. He cannot fight them, but he cannot ignore them. The system crashes.
This dynamic of weaponized passivity strongly recalls Ursula K. Le Guin's concept of Shiftgrethor, introduced in her 1969 novel, The Left Hand of Darkness.
Shiftgrethor is a great comparison. On the icy planet of Gethin in Le Guin's universe, the inhabitants do not wage conventional war. Their society is governed by Shiftgrethor, an incredibly complex, unspoken system of prestige, face-saving, and indirect political maneuvering.
When the Earth envoy, Genli I, arrives on Gethin, he is constantly humiliated and outmaneuvered because he approaches politics like a battering ram.
He expects direct, confrontational demands. He cannot perceive the invisible web of social pressure that is actively dictating his fate.
The Centaurians are applying a planetary-scale version of Shiftgrethor. They are exerting absolute political dominance over the Achilles without committing a single act of conventional aggression.
And Breen begins to literally unravel on the bridge. The silence of 80,000 people is deafening to him. He feels the weight of their grief, and he processes it as an existential threat.
So, as his reality collapses, he frantically searches the manual for a reboot sequence. He flips through the dense legal code of Earth's colonial regulations until he finds a loophole that will allow him to reestablish the paradigm of force.
He finds Section 27D.
Right, Section 27D, which is a masterpiece of bureaucratic evil.
It states that if an alien race is hostile, powerful, and psychologically distorted, to a degree that constitutes an impossibility of negotiation and a mortal danger to the survey crew, the commander is authorized to take extreme measures to neutralize the threat.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Breen activates the intercom and addresses his crew. He argues that because the Centaurians' behavior is so irrational, because standing silently in the dark instead of fighting or signing a treaty is evidence of psychological distortion, they technically constitute a mortal danger.
He formally announces that he will lift the Achilles into low orbit and use the ship's needle beams to vaporize the 80,000 men, women, and children standing on the grass below.
He is preparing to commit planetary genocide to cure his own cognitive dissonance.
It is the ultimate inevitable conclusion of the hyper-rationality we discussed at the beginning. The logic of Dr. Groteschel and Failsafe reaches its terminal point here.
Right, because to a mind that has entirely replaced morality with mechanism, peace is an anomaly.
An anomaly is an error. An error is a threat, and a threat must be eradicated by the machine.
So Breen issues the command. He tells Pirelli to ignite the engines. But as the words leave his mouth, something breaks inside him.
Because he is a rigid, rule-bound bureaucrat, but he is not a psychopath.
Exactly. He hears his own voice ordering the incineration of tens of thousands of unarmed, silent people. He looks at their faces on the monitors, and the sheer, unfathomable evil of what his logic has produced finally shatters his conditioning.
The manual fails. It simply cannot contain the moral weight of reality.
Breen formally relinquishes command to his subordinate. He orders the release of Durand, who had been confined to quarters for protesting the mission, and then Breen retreats to his cabin and locks the door.
He announces that he will remain in isolation until they return to Earth, where he will submit himself for personality adjustment.
He recognizes that according to the logic of Earth, he has gone insane. But he also recognizes that the logic of Earth is fundamentally demonic.
With the chain of command broken and the genocidal order rescinded, the narrative shifts to the personal fallout of this encounter. The crew must decide what to do next, and their choices illustrate the terrible cost of recognizing the truth about progress.
Gomo Durand makes his choice. Throughout the entire deep dive, we've seen his internal struggle. He is sickened by the white fire of Earth. He has formed a profound connection with Sharon and her son.
When the Achilles prepares to break orbit, Durand defects.
He steps out of the airlock and walks out onto the grass. He ceases to be a scientist of the Empire and becomes a pilgrim.
He is willing to permanently abandon the scars, to give up the entire trajectory of human technological destiny in order to find peace in the dirt of a single world.
It is a beautiful, triumphant arc for Durand, but Wilkie is too smart a writer to let the audience off with a simple utopian ending. He immediately contrasts Durand's salvation with the tragedy of Myers, the psychologist.
Myers is the most heartbreaking character in the play.
He really is.
Because he isn't blind like Breen. Myers fully understands the beauty of Centauri IV. He experienced a moment of total clarity earlier in the story, realizing the horrific nature of Earth's extractive imperialism. He knows that Durand is making the morally correct choice.
But Myers cannot step off the ship.
Myers is chained to the machine. He tells Durand that he has to go back to Earth because of his wife. And he mentions a specific chilling detail. They have finally been granted a first child permit.
Wait, a first child permit?
Yes.
That single phrase retroactively reveals the full dystopian nightmare of Earth. The state has reached such a level of absolute technocratic control that human reproduction is regulated by bureaucratic permit. You need the government's permission to propagate the species.
Myers is not bound to Earth by ideology or blindness or greed. He is bound by love. He loves his wife, and he wants his permitted child more than he desires the philosophical purity of Centauri IV.
He knowingly chooses to return to a sterile, totalitarian hell, specifically because human attachment prevents him from breaking free.
This raises an important question. Is integration possible? Can we integrate the wisdom of restraint into a modern industrialized society? Or is it a binary choice?
Must we completely abandon the machine like Durand to save our souls? Can we have the smartphone, the MRI machine, and the starship without eventually building the white fire that burns the grass?
The play's outlook on integration is deeply pessimistic. It suggests that the technological paradigm is an all-consuming fire. Durand's choice mirrors the ending of Arthur C. Clarke's Childhood's End.
Remind me of how that one ends.
In Clarke's novel, humanity undergoes a radical evolutionary leap, merging into a cosmic, psychic overmind, essentially destroying the physical Earth in the process.
Right.
But one man, Jan Rodrigues, chooses not to transcend. He chooses to stay behind on the dying planet to bear witness. He embraces his physical, limited humanity, even as it means his own end.
Durand makes a very similar choice. He abandons the cosmic march of progress to remain grounded in the quiet, tragic, beautiful reality of a limited life.
And so, the Achilles fires its thrusters and lifts off into the dark, leaving Durand behind, leaving the 80,000 Centaurians in their peaceful silence.
And we are left sitting by the radio, grappling with the wake of their departure.
It forces a brutal reevaluation of how we measure success. We chart the advancement of our civilization by the processing speed of our microchips, the orbital range of our satellites, and the lethality of our drones.
But the burning of the grass posits that technological advancement and moral advancement are not parallel tracks. They can, and often do, diverge entirely.
A civilization can conquer the galaxy and entirely lose its own soul.
As you look out the window tonight, out over the quiet streets of Atchison, or the rolling fields of the Midwest, or the concrete canyons of a major city, think about the grass persistently pushing its way up through the pavement.
Think about the massive, complex systems we build to burn it away.
We started this broadcast with a specific question. What if the most advanced civilization is the one that deliberately walked away from technology?
It demands that we completely redefine the word advanced. Does true advancement lie in the power to reshape the universe, or in the wisdom to leave it alone?
I want to leave you with one final, lingering thought. The Centaurians locked their science in museums because they survived the fire. They retained the muscle memory of how to live without the machine.
They knew the alternative.
Right. But if our civilization faced a true existential crisis today, a collapse brought on by our own technological hubris, would we have the moral fortitude to willingly walk away from our screens, our grids, and our synthetic comforts?
Or has our total dependency on the machine entirely erased our ability to even imagine a life without it?
Would we rather burn the grass than learn how to live in the fields?
It is the defining question of the modern age, and every generation must decide how it will answer.
Thank you for pulling up a chair and joining us on this journey tonight. We hope this deep dive into the burning of the grass has sparked something vital in your own imagination. These stories matter. These forgotten radio plays are not just entertainment, they are essential conversations about who we are and what we are choosing to become. Keep exploring these ideas. Keep asking the hard questions of the world around you. And remember, here at Chesterton Radio, the open door is always on. Have a wonderful night.